Right, so today, literally today, as in Monday the 25th of June 2026, Keir Starmer stood up at a press conference in Downing Street and announced that the UK is going to ban children under 16 from using social media. TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, Snapchat, X, Facebook, gone, off limits. You are not old enough. The grown-ups have decided. He said, and I'm going to quote this because it's the kind of sentence that sounded like it was written by a PR firm at 2 a.m. We're going further than any country in the world by banning social media for under 16s and putting wider protections in place to give kids their childhood back. Give kids their childhood back. Right. Today, we need to talk about this and why this ban is going to accomplish almost nothing useful. Why the people cheering for it haven't thought it through, and most importantly, why the government has just handed itself an enormous amount of power over the internet in exchange for a solution that teenagers will root around in about 45 minutes. Let's crack on. Before we get into why I think this is a mess, let's be clear about what's actually been announced, because the headlines are a bit all over the place. The legislation is coming through in Part 3 of Children's Wellbeing and Schools Act 2026. The government has been doing a consultation on this since March. Growing up in the online world, they called it. And they've now apparently made up their minds. The ban is expected to go through Parliament before Christmas, with a potential enforcement date of spring 2027. So we're not talking about something that happened overnight. This has been building for months. They just chose today to make the big announcement. In practice, under 16s would be blocked from creating or using accounts on platforms including TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, Snapchat, Facebook and X. Messaging apps like WhatsApp and Signal are apparently excluded, which is interesting, and we'll come back to that. Gaming platforms are in scope, but only for live streaming element, not the games themselves. On top of the ban itself, there are additional restrictions. Live streaming blocked entirely for under 16s. Under 16s can't communicate with adults they don't already know. Under 17s get those protections enabled by default, but with the option to turn them off, to avoid what they're calling a cliff edge at 16. There's also talk of overnight curfews. Yes, the government wants social media to have a bedtime, and restrictions on infinite scroll for minors. And underpinning all of it, age verification. Platforms have to verify that their users are old enough. The question of how they're supposed to do that is where things start to get interesting. Now, Starmer was very clear that he didn't make this decision lightly. He acknowledged that social media has brought real benefits to young people. He acknowledged that some teens would find ways around it, and he vowed to fight back if the tech companies resist. That's all fine, sounds reasonable. The problem is that acknowledging something's going to be imperfect isn't the same as having a plan. And from where I'm sitting, what they've announced today is a policy that's going to be very difficult to enforce and create significant collateral damage in terms of privacy, and fundamentally misidentifies the problem it's trying to solve. So let's take those one at a time. The obvious question with any ban is, how do you enforce it? And here we have a very instructive example, because we don't have to speculate. Australia did this first, December 2025, about 6 months ago now. They became the first country in the world to ban under 16s from social media. Same platforms, same general idea. Big announcement, world first legislation. Save the children. How's that going? Well, a survey published in April this year by the Molly Rose Foundation, which is actually a UK suicide prevention charity, looked at about 1,050 Australian 12 to 15-year-olds. They found that more than 60% of teens who had social media accounts before the ban still had access to at least one of those platforms after it came into force. 60%. That's not a rounding error. That's the majority of kids the ban was supposed to protect still on social media. How are they getting in? The ways are almost charming in their creativity. A 14-year-old in New South Wales told the Washington Post he was just going to use her mum's Face ID. Someone on Reddit suggested buying a printed mesh face mask from Temu, which, I mean, fair play, that's lateral thinking. To fool the recognition, VPNs, borrowing a parent's account, creating accounts with slightly incorrect birthdays, which it turns out is a thing teenagers have been doing since Facebook launched, and which no one has ever successfully stopped. The Australian government's response to the VPN question was particularly instructive. They told platforms to try to stop under-16s from using VPNs. When journalists asked the Safety Commissioner how platforms were supposed to technically achieve that, her office declined to comment. Right, so the official position is platforms must stop VPN use, but we're not going to explain how. That's policy, apparently. And meanwhile, over in the UK, when we tried age verification for adult websites under the Online Safety Act, VPN usage surged by, brace yourself, 6,430%. That's not a typo, 6,430%. Teenagers in this country learned what a VPN was within about a fortnight. Now the platforms themselves are trying. Snapchat says they check account activity over the previous month, not just current IP. So VPN won't necessarily help. Meta says it looks at signals beyond IP address, but the Molly Rose Foundation survey also found that 2/3 of underage Australian users said the platform had taken no action to remove or restrict their existing accounts. The Australian PM acknowledged from the beginning that the ban wouldn't be 100% effective. He compared it to laws on underage drinking. The fact that teenagers sometimes get hold of a beer doesn't mean you shouldn't have drinking age laws. And look, I get it. I get the argument. I genuinely do. But here's where the analogy breaks down. When a teenager buys alcohol underage, they have to find a physical product in a physical location from a physical person willing to break the law and risk losing their license. And there are natural friction points. With social media, the friction is open a browser, download a VPN, done. Or use your mum's phone. Or just create another account with a different email. The enforcement mechanisms available to platforms are nowhere near robust enough to stop determined teenagers. And most teenagers are pretty determined about keeping their Instagram. Here's where it gets darker though, because there's a version of actually enforcing this. You could, in theory, build an age verification system that genuinely works. And that system would be absolutely terrifying. To verify that someone is over 16, you need some kind of identity check. There are a few approaches. You can ask for a government-issued ID, passport, driving licence, and have someone check it. You can use facial analysis AI to estimate someone's age from a photo. You can use inferred profiling, which is basically building up a picture of who someone is from behavioural data and guessing their age from that. None of these options are neutral. The Open Rights Group has been very vocal about this. They've pointed out that age verification companies are still lightly regulated in the UK. Their data has been breached before. Discord had a significant breach of age verification data last year, and once that data is collected, it's out there. The concern isn't hypothetical. It's already happened. Think about what you're asking a 17-year-old to do. Hand over biometric data, potentially a photo of their face, potentially their passport number, to a private company so that that company can confirm to Instagram that they're old enough to post a photo of their lunch. And this data will then be held by that company under whatever security standards they happen to have, for however long they decide to keep it. Article 19, the International Human Rights Organization, made the point that this is being presented as child protection. But what it actually does is require children to submit even more personal data to even more systems through age verification services that may have their own commercial interests in that data. And here's the really uncomfortable bit. The government isn't just building this for children. If age verification infrastructure gets built at scale for social media, it effectively becomes a mass age verification system for the entire internet. Everyone, adults included, will have to prove their age to access platforms, whether they want to or not. We saw this with the Online Safety Act and adult content sites. The intent was to protect kids from adult content. The practical effect was that adults who wanted to access legal content had to hand over ID to verify their age, through systems of varying trustworthiness. The privacy cost was borne to everyone, not just the people being protected. Drop a comment if you've been through one of those age verification flows for a perfectly legal website and felt entirely comfortable with it. I'll wait. Right, so we've established that enforcement is going to be leaky at best, and that verification infrastructure required to make it work properly has serious privacy implications. But I want to go deeper than that, because I think the fundamental problem with this policy is that it's treating a symptom rather than the disease. Starmer said at the press conference that social media is making children unhappy and is designed to be addictive. And on that, he's not wrong. Infinite scroll, algorithmic content selection, notification systems designed to create compulsive check-in behaviour. These are real design decisions made by real companies for real commercial reasons. The platforms are built to maximise engagement, which in practice means maximising the amount of time users spend on them. And for developing brains, that's potentially harmful. But here's the thing, banning under-16s from those platforms doesn't change any of those design decisions. The platforms will still have infinite scroll. They'll still have addictive notification systems. They'll still be optimising for engagement over well-being. They'll just be doing it to 16-year-olds instead of 15-year-olds. The actual problem isn't that children can access social media. The actual problem is that the platforms are built in ways that are harmful to vulnerable users, including, by the way, plenty of vulnerable adults. If you wanted to actually address that, you'd regulate the design of the platforms. Mandatory chronological feeds, restrictions on algorithmic amplification of emotional content, notification curfews for all users, not just minors, proper enforcement of the design standards that Online Safety Act was supposed to require. Article 19 put it directly. The problem is not children's access to social media. It is the toxic incentives and practices embedded in the platforms. Instead, we get a ban, which lets both the government and the platforms off the hook. The governments get to look like they've done something. The platforms get to say, well, we tried. Kids are just sneaky. And the underlying business model that created the problem in the first place remains completely intact. There's another consequence that doesn't get talked about enough, and it genuinely concerns me. When you ban kids from mainstream platforms, the ones with at least some content moderation, some safety teams, some regulatory scrutiny, where do they go? They go somewhere else. In Australia, in the weeks immediately after the ban came in, there was a notable surge in usage on platforms that weren't covered by the legislation. Less regulated platforms. Platforms with fewer content moderation resources. Platforms where, frankly, children are more at risk of encountering harmful content, not less. This is a well-documented problem. This is a well-documented pattern with prohibition-style policies. You don't eliminate the behaviour, you push it elsewhere. You push it somewhere where you have less visibility and less control. A teenager who's been banned from Instagram isn't going to put their phone down and go build a treehouse. They're going to go find something else, and that something else might be considerably worse. The Australian legislation itself acknowledged that kids were going to move to Discord, Roblox and other platforms that weren't in scope. And the guidance that came back was basically, well, those are lower risk, which may be true in some cases, but it's a bit of a leap to assume that all unregulated corners of the internet are lower risk than Instagram. And then there's this, which is the bit that doesn't get enough airtime in these conversations. For a lot of young people, social media isn't a frivolous distraction, it's a lifeline. LGBTQ+ teenagers in unsupportive home environments who found online communities, young people with anxiety or social difficulties who find online communication genuinely easier to navigate, kids with rare conditions or disabilities who've connected with others in the same situation, teenagers in rural areas where their social world is genuinely narrower in person than it is online, young people from minority backgrounds finding representation and community they can't get locally. The parliamentary petition against this ban has nearly 70,000 signatures, and a lot of the comments are from young people saying, "This is how I communicate with my friends. This is my community. This is my support network." When the government says it's giving kids their childhood back, it's imagining a specific type of childhood, probably the kind most MPs had, where you went outside and kicked a ball around and came home for tea. And that's a lovely childhood for a kid who fits that mould. But the internet has made childhood more livable for a lot of kids who don't fit that mould. And a blanket ban doesn't distinguish between an anxious teenager who's found genuine support online and a kid doom scrolling at 2 in the morning. Right, I'm going to pause here because I want to hear from you on this one. This is genuinely a contested question, and I'm curious that I've been arguing one side of it pretty hard. The government has said this policy is backed by 9 in 10 parents. That's a significant number, and the instinct to protect children from harm is not a bad instinct, right? Right, let's finish this off. I want to make the case directly now, rather than dancing around it. The fundamental problem with this ban isn't technical or legal, or even political, it's philosophical. The government has decided that parents cannot be trusted to manage their children's relationship with social media, and therefore the state will do it for them. As a parent, I find that a deeply problematic position. Parents have always had to navigate the relationship between their children and whatever current era's version of harmful influence is: television, video games, music, the internet generally. And the state's role historically has been to provide information, tools and guardrails, not to substitute its own judgment for parental judgment. There are practical tools available right now: screen time controls built into iOS and Android, content filtering, app restrictions, the ability to say as a parent, you can have Instagram when you're 14, but I'm going to check in on what you're doing. The ability to have conversations with your children about what they're seeing online, how algorithms work, why some content is designed to make you feel bad about yourself. And those tools, perfect? No. Is parenting hard? Absolutely. But the answer to parenting is hard cannot be, therefore the government will parent instead. Because here's what this ban actually does to the parent-child dynamic. It takes the conversation about social media out of the home. Instead of parents and children negotiating together about what's appropriate, which is messy and difficult, and how children actually learn to make judgments, you get a technical system trying to enforce a blanket rule. And when teenagers root around that technical system, which they will, they'll do it without their parents knowing, because they've been told the correct answer is "you're not allowed," rather than "here's how to think about this." The ban doesn't teach teenagers anything, it just tries to lock the door, and they'll find another door, because they always do. I want to say something that might be a bit uncomfortable. Ask yourself, who benefits from this policy? The government benefits. They get to say they did something. They get to support 9 in 10 parents who are, understandably, worried about what their kids are doing online. They get headlines about giving children their childhoods back. It's good politics. The platforms, believe it or not, also benefit. This might sound counterintuitive, but a policy that's nominally about their product being too dangerous for children while leaving their fundamental business model completely intact, is a much better outcome for them than regulation that would actually change how they operate. They'd much rather implement a leaky age check than be forced to redesign their recommendation algorithms or restrict infinite scroll for everyone. The age verification companies obviously benefit. This creates enormous demand for their services overnight. Who doesn't necessarily benefit? Children, particularly the vulnerable ones who use social media not for fun but for survival, who are going to be told their access to their support network is illegal and who are going to find ways around it, but now in secret without any adult awareness or oversight. The government keeps referencing Australia as the model here. They've said they want to go further than Australia, but we've seen how Australia's going. Most of the kids who were on social media before are still on social media now. The platforms aren't technically complying, but reasonable steps is a very low bar. And the evidence that the ban has meaningfully improved children's mental health or well-being so far, not really there yet. The UK has also pointed to France, Spain and other countries moving in this direction. And yes, there's a global momentum here that's real. Governments across the world are doing something about children and social media. And I understand the instinct to not be left behind. But doing something and doing the right thing aren't the same. And when Australia's Prime Minister is conceding from day one that the ban won't be 100% effective, and that data 6 months in shows that most kids are still getting through, the question you have to ask is, what exactly are we sacrificing the privacy of every user on the internet for? The UK has just announced what it's calling the most ambitious child protection legislation in the world when it comes to social media. And I think it's going to fail on its own terms. It won't keep the most determined teenagers off social media. It will push some of them into less regulated spaces. It will require age verification infrastructure that creates serious privacy risks for everyone. It gives the government a new lever to control who accesses what online. And it lets the platforms off the hook for the design decisions that actually cause the problem in the first place. The people who will be most affected are the teenagers who are online, because they need to be, not because they're addicted. A kid with social anxiety who finds online interaction genuinely easier. The teenager dealing with something difficult who's found a community of people going through the same thing. Starmer said this isn't going to be cost-free. He's right about that. The question is whether we've correctly calculated what we're paying and what we're getting in return. I don't think we have. Right, that's the argument. I could be wrong. I'm frequently wrong. Drop a comment, make the case. I want to hear where you think I've misread this. If you found this useful, subscribe. There's more coming. Take care.